Okay, I'm here with Freddie Winter, and we are going to dig in on the topic of speed. I'd like to talk about speed. I'd like to get your take on good speed versus bad speed. It sounds like that's maybe your philosophy a little bit, or that's how you think about it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe that's a jumping off point. How do you see speed? And you specifically talk about a certain section of the course that the best skiers in the world are better at than everybody else. So what does that leave you thinking?
Well, okay, so I so often hear people saying, "Oh, I want to ski that's crazy fast. I want to be super fast." And I'm like, "Okay, but do you when you are on your hardest pass in a tournament, headwind or tailwind?" And they invariably say headwind, and I'm like, "Wait,
Yeah.
the headwind slows you down from the very start. It decreases your acceleration. It increases your deceleration. So at
Yep.
any point, you should be going slower than a tailwind, and you're not, like I say, like your swing will be less, and so." And people kind of scratch their heads, and I'm like, yeah, because what you really want is good deceleration, because that keeps the line tight. That's
Yep.
the reason you like to be able to get the speed up until a certain point, but then you want to be able to decelerate well. So my point in saying that is that for me, speed is not the be all and end all. And this year I was on a 67. Last year on a 66. I'm 195 pounds. Maybe 190 when I'm feeling really athletic, but I'm on a 66-inch ski, and I think that because actually I value over speed, I value control, and speed is necessary. Absolutely, it gets you from side to side, and without it, you are not turning any buoys. But for me, I think that speed is good when it's in the right direction, so you can call that velocity. Inevitably, you're going to be swung in with the arc, especially as the rope gets short. But as far as I'm concerned, my aim is to try and maximize that path out, so that I can swing my ski out and then cut it back in when I get around the buoy.
So, what's one thing you do to aid that, or to maximize that idea, that concept in your head? How do you best achieve that, do you think?
My old coach John Battleday, who I skied with for many years, if I could point at, I worked with him, from when I was 8 years old or whatever. But if I had to, the one main thing that I could say that he taught me, the thing that we dialed in on the most, and has really stood me in very good stead, I believe, is back arm pressure. So people a few years ago started to get this weird idea, in my opinion, to where you want to have more pressure on your front arm, i.e. the one that's closer to the boat, the one that is closer to the buoy that you've just turned, versus the one that you're actually trying to get to next. That you need to have more pressure through that arm, and I think that doesn't make any sense. I think that you want to have a little bit more pressure through, when you're moving towards your left, through your left shoulder. The reason for that is your shoulders are where the pull is connected to your body, because of course it comes through the handle, through your arms, through your shoulders, and the shoulders are basically the joints at which you're transferring there's an angle that the pull comes from this angle, and then it's transferred down to the ski, through the shoulders. So if you can have your shoulder, your left shoulder, as you move towards your left, a little bit further away from the boat than the right shoulder, with crucially, I always say 2/3 to a third, or 60 to 40, or somewhere around there, then that means that you're not going to give back to the boat as you hit the second wake. The reason that, like I said a minute ago, that a lot of people can do a really good job of swinging towards the first wake, but they do the best skiers in the world are the ones that get to centerline and then maintain that direction, which obviously requires very good technique and management of load and various other factors. But I think that's where those guys can hold that line by not rotating. If we're moving in this direction, out from 1 to 2, the skiers that aren't doing it right, they'll rotate their shoulders in, and then they'll sort of like try and drop their butt over, and then they'll throw themselves out. But at that point, they throw their arms out. They've already lost at that point. You've got to really hit the second wake, and then for this shoulder to roll, to continue out, and it's not to pull longer at all. It's just to maintain pressure and not to be pulled around by the boat. So the ski can swing from boat side to bank side, or to ground side, or whatever, in front of the buoy, without, because of course as soon as you roll inside this way, then you're generally going to move onto the tail of the ski as you try and push it out in front of you, and then you've lost speed, width, all the stuff that you really want to maximize to have an effective path through the course.
Approach. Yeah. So I got a question, because there are a couple things that we could dig into. I don't want to get into all of it. I think we used to talk about trailing arm pressure, which would be that arm closest to the buoy you just turned. Mm-hmm. And that's what we termed it, which I think there's still a good case for. I think it's a more complex sequencing, but I think there's a good case for trying to prioritize trailing arm pressure on the acceleration cut out of the buoy. Oftentimes it helps people keep their arm pressure more balanced. So in other words, instead of like 90-10, it helps people get closer to 60-40 or even 50-50, which I think on the acceleration phase, and we can get into this later, but I think on the acceleration phase, I think that's desirable because it balances the net rotational torque on your body. In other words, if you've got 90% of the pull on that lead arm and we're going left, the boat's trying to unwind you and twist you open to the boat and try to pull you up before you ever get to the wakes. Whereas if you're just saying, okay, screw it, I'm going to go 50-50 and try to feel more pressure through that trailing arm, now the force vector is not only connected still at your shoulders, but it's connected in the center of your body instead of on the lead arm side of your body. So before you get to the wakes, you're not going to get pulled up. But what I would say the ideal sequencing would be try to prioritize even arm pressure on the acceleration phase into center line, but at center line, transition to more lead arm pressure on the way outbound. More what you're talking about.
That makes, yeah, I can see that. So I guess I misunderstood because I read it in the Water Ski magazine or whatever, and I'm like, I don't get this. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. To break it down to on the way towards the wake, get your pressure on your trailing arm so that you don't over torque and then get unpeeled. So both of those together, they work together to not, so you don't get pulled in towards the boat to where you've kind of lost on your way out.
Sure. So the other thing I want to ask you about, and I don't know if this is discussed enough, I think it is just in weird ways, but just to get this out in the open, specifically when you're talking about how do you maximize outbound trajectory and how do you control that outbound movement into the pre-turn and into apex? I think what's really overlooked oftentimes, at least it's not spoken about overtly or concretely enough, is how you position your body and how you're accepting the forces from the boat when you get to center line. Like, what situation have you set up? In other words, Terry and I have talked about this, but oftentimes we were so short at 41 off, we would turn into a lot of tension. We'd turn into a lot of angle out of one ball at 41 off, and we'd backside the buoy, but we end up narrow and fast at 2, and it's hard to make a turn. I think this happens to a lot of skiers. You backside a buoy, you have a tight rope out of the buoy, but if your weight's back, if you're not only leaning too far away from the boat, but you're also back behind your feet too much, in my opinion, or in other words, if you just have too much load on the ski for the amount of speed that you're generating in the center line, it doesn't matter if you have enough speed at center line. If you're in a super loaded situation, in other words, like you said, your lead arm is too far down, you have 90% of the load on that lead arm, even if you have the required speed, even if you have the right trajectory, there's so much load on the ski and so much load on the rope at that point that no matter what the metrics say, no matter what your velocity says, no matter what the arrow of that where the arrow of that velocity is pointing, the ski is too loaded, the rope is too loaded, you're going to get peeled inside out or outside in, however you think about it, no matter how strong you are. And I would argue that that's one of the things that you and some other guys and girls are the best at, is that you don't spike the load before center line such that you can maintain that tension outbound better.
I think that's very generous of you. I think I do a pretty good job into out of 135 into 2 and 4. I think I could do a much better job going the other way, because sometimes I do get super deep, and then like exactly like you say, you kind of just get pulled around. But I think that it's an interesting thing to think of if you consider. I mean, water skiing is actually really interesting to think of, like from a sort of bird's eye view. So you come out of a turn and you've got the ski. The rope is always going to be, when it's tight, is always going to be the same distance from the boat. But your ski, and let's say that your arms are straight, as your body gets more and more leverage, more of a lever, then your ski will end up closer to the boat. And the close, so when people kind of come out and they've got that really big turn, and sometimes that's even possible to do without being crazy loaded. I mean, usually not, but sometimes you can have that ski like really close to the boat, but kind of be out here. But as you have to change your edge. Now it is not possible if you have the ski super close to the boat, then it is not possible to change your edge in an effective manner unless you climb back on top of that ski first and kind of go over the front. At which point you're moving towards the boat, which is something you don't want to be doing, especially at that point where you're trying to change your edge, which is as you hit the second wake more or less. So yeah, like that ski being very far away from your head in terms of obviously
distance.
The same length. Yes, it's distance, but also kind of like just taking it as a 2D picture from the top.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have to like climb back over, and I think that's one of my big weaknesses is that I'll do that a little bit out of 2 and 4. I'll come out and I get a big turn, which makes you feel really good. I've turned it really aggressively, and you kind of I'm in it, and then I'll kind of be hitting second wake, and my feet are too far in front of me, so then I have to literally like pull on my arms to pull myself over the front of the ski, and then I kind of like stick my ski out on the other side of me. But it's not an effective movement, and I
Sure.
as the rope gets shorter and shorter, it's more and more critical to be as we've just been talking about, to swing your feet out in front of the next buoy. So and by sort of keeping your chest up and moving the ski from one side of you to the other, instead of moving your body from one side of the ski to the other.
Exactly.
The ski swings this way instead of your body moving this way. This is a very visual podcast here.
I know. I wish I had video. I've got video. I got video of you that I should have brought for screen sharing. Specifically Hilltop. You almost ran 41 there. You should have ran 41 there. One of those rounds. I got a good drone shot. I'll actually maybe show that. I would like to talk about that outbound a little bit more, about moving the feet versus moving your body. I guess we would call this transition. I call it the outbound swing, but let's talk about transitions. Everybody understands that's the edge change. That's where you go from the cutting edge to the turning edge. Specifically, what do you find is a weakness for most people, or what are you working on in your own skiing to try to maximize better, to have a better approach into the turn?
What I've been working on pretty much my whole life has been to not do weird stuff into buoy 3 and 5 when I get loaded out of 2 and 4. So I mean, I'm trying really to to continue the path of my ski from buoy line to center line out in front of the next buoy. So I'm aiming to not do that thing which we've sort of talked about where I end up rolling forward as a result of excess pressure to sort of, so my body path is inside the line of the buoy while still sort of like just about getting away with it by throwing my ski outside of the buoy. But yeah, it's why
does that happen? Why do you think that happens?
It's because you come out of traditionally an onside for most skiers. That's the one where you can kind of like fall out the back and load, but still be just about enough in control. That you're just leaning back with the ski super loaded that you can kind of hold on, and then you have to transition from one edge to the other. Now you've got two options there, and one is to move, to swing, to continue the ski swinging out and it will move out from underneath your body. So you're kind of moving the ski from one side of you to the other side, or you can, the less desirable one, but the absolutely much easier one is to, kind of roll, start moving yourself to the other side of the ski. So, and the way I always explain it to people is that you can see people come into a turn and sort of not looking at their, tightness of the rope or anything like that. But, you just take a free swing of their position. You can see people come in. I'm going to try and explain this well. This is going to be kind of tricky, but
you can use your hands because this is going to be visual as well. So don't be afraid to use your hands. So
you can see people come in and chest up, nice extension, ski on edge coming in, but then one skier might be 4 feet wider than the other, and it's generally because the second guy who's 4 feet wider has rolled his feet out. And so he's got a better path in front of the buoy, so he can kind of get that nice semi-circle kind of arc in front,
Yeah.
whereas the other guy's rolled forward. And okay, they look fairly similar at the buoy, except for the other guy's super narrow. He's got no tension in the rope, so he's basically just sailing down the lake with no pressure on his feet because he's moved inside
pressure on the
towards
rope
the
either.
boat. No pressure from the rope. So it's
Yep.
like he just kind of and he's got to basically just throw his feet in front of him, and that's an offside turn because he's come from his onside. That's not desirable. Your best ones are the ones where you can kind of continue the ski to move underneath the rope and onto the other side of you versus you moving over towards the boat.
That feeling in the less desirable scenario reminds me of like on the playground swing when you get pushed a little too high or you push somebody else a little too hard and they go all the way up, but then they kind of come in before they start to swing down. So there's that looseness and they fall and kind of whip into that tight rope again, that tight chain.
Yeah,
That's
slack, isn't it? That's exactly what slack is.
That's what that is. Yeah. You've come inside, you've lost connection with the boat. And at some point you've got to reconnect with the boat. And that's the hardest part. That's what you do so well you counteract that really well. That's what Nate does. That's what Regina does really well is the rope's tight almost all the way out to apex almost every time. Then you know where the boat is and you know how to move back in behind the boat much more effectively, much more consistently, I would say. But I got a question. I have a theory about transitioning, about controlling the transition. So you've talked about, from the center line out, that's the hardest part for a lot of people. Like maintaining that trajectory, maintaining that what'd you call it, velocity instead of speed. Because speed is just a magnitude. Velocity is speed with a direction. So your momentum, your body times the amount of velocity you're going, that has a magnitude, that has a number. And it's my opinion that the people who can conserve that the best on the first part of that outbound move, in other words, from center line through the second whitewater, are the ones who are going to ski more buoys. Because if you can conserve more energy on that outbound swing, you don't need as much on the inbound downswing from the finish of the turn into center line. You can get away with less speed into the wakes if you can conserve more speed outbound to apex. And the way that I've talked about this before, and Manel may not like this and you may not like this as well and I don't like this because this is how I used to ski too. I would get crushed, I would get absorbed, I would basically get compressed through that transition. And a lot of skiers do this. And the reason that I'd say that I'm trying to tell people to try to stay more, I call it athletic stance, but to try to maintain your athletic stance through that transition and into that outbound move is because unlike snow skiing, where in snow skiing, the goal is always to be light on your skis and let your mass stay the same level above the snow and let your skis transition underneath you to the other side. That's to conserve energy. But in our sport, we have a 350, 400 horsepower boat. We don't need to conserve our energy as much because we can take energy from the boat through the rope. So in other words, my whole theory is that if you can conserve energy by staying connected to the boat further outbound, in other words, further on that swing out into apex, if you can stay connected to the boat longer and more tension in the rope outbound, you will swing to a higher point sooner, which means you'll have more width, which also means you'll be able to shut down sooner, which means you'll be able to turn back in behind the boat a little bit sooner. And all of it is to say, I feel like one of the easiest ways to conserve tension in the rope or to maintain tension in the rope outbound is number one, what you said, to not overload into the wakes, not have your feet so far away from you into the wakes. But number two, not get compressed through the transition. In other words, if you can keep the ski from getting to the other side of you, you're not pulling longer, but if you can make the ski take longer to stand your body up by not letting your body get compressed, but making your ski just lift your body up before you get to the new edge, you will have indirectly maintained tension further outbound towards the buoy. And that is what's going to flick you to a wider point sooner.
I'm with you. a few thoughts on that. The first thing that came to my mind as soon as you started talking about that, it reminded me of like the Travers Grand Prix 2018.
Yeah.
Where I came second, and then but you were there and you were videoing the whole weekend, and you just had you had everyone's cuts in slow mo straight towards the camera into a buoy one you were sort of mainly into all the righties offside turns.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting because we were at like some sort of a party get together. Everyone was kind of drinking, and then you and I and a couple of other skiers, like the real nerds, were sitting there with your laptop, like, oh, look at that, and and I'm like, damn, he's bloody right. And it's not something that I'd particularly thought of before, but it's something that is absolutely true. And the thing that it makes perfect sense. The way you explain it is great, and I think that one further point is that as soon as you let your hips or your mass, because we're talking about momentum, which involves your mass, your center of mass move towards the water, which is what's happening when you get compressed, then you've got to get that back up. So if we're gonna trace a line of center of mass, and then it has a point where it just dips down, it's got to come back up, and you're then having to press on your legs at exactly the wrong time when you want a nice edge change. And the easiest way to edge change is where you're not pushing really hard on your feet, because that inevitably that just ends up with you're scooping the ski versus rolling it. The thing that I was really happy. I didn't get to go back to England this year, but a guy that I ski with, I've skied with for more or less all my life, who Steve Glanfield, who's top guy who owns a ski club that I ski at in England. I posted a picture or a video or something midway through the summer, and we'd been in touch, but we hadn't been talking about skiing or stuff like that. And he says to me, he goes, "Man, you're so much taller as you hit the second wake than what you used to be." And I was like, and it was cool because it's something I had been working on. I'd been trying, not just through skiing, but just trying to be a little bit more athletic and strengthening my legs and doing a bit of cycling and all that sort of stuff through the lockdown. So that was really very, very gratifying to hear that he was able to pick up on something I'd been working on without us even having discussed it. So I was happy with that. Yeah. But the hard thing about that, for if someone who's watching this is might sort of scratch their head, because the thing that I definitely tell everyone I think is really important is you do, especially when you're at 22 off and the boat's at or maybe it's going a little bit slower. 34, you have a bit of a bump.
Yep.
Or even slow, you have a bit of a bump. So you do have to offset that somehow using your inbuilt body suspension. And the thing I always tell people is there's 2 points of suspension. There's your knees and your hips. Okay. Yep. And I always say use your knees as much as possible, because you don't want those hips wiggling all around the place. As soon as your hips go back, your chest goes forward, your head falls over, you're all off balance. So use your knees as much as possible. So that's a really hard thing to say, is like, on the one hand, you want to absorb with your knees so that your shoulders do sort of, and head don't get disturbed so much by the wakes, but then on the other hand, off the second wake, then stand tall. So that's, again, we're talking about do this up to this exact point, and then from that point on, do this completely different thing.
Sure.
So the worst thing I ever hear people say is, I've got to push against the weights. I'm like, no, you don't. You do not want to like straight legged and pushing against the weights, because that's just going to mean that you're going to have to compensate somewhere else when you're going over a big wake. It's not going to work. So you got to be soft, and then as you change your edge, you've kind of got to be make sure you're not compressing and going down towards the water.
I agree. I think this goes back to the first thing I asked you today, or in this series, about what do you see people doing counterproductive when the shoulders go forward and the hips go back on the cut into the wakes. That is, I think, a limiting factor, because then you can't. The way I put it is what you just said. I would kind of say it like this. I've coached it for years, where I've told people you don't want to come into the wakes already bent up or already compressed, because then you've got no more give to give. Mm-hmm. So if
it's where you crash.
It's where you crash,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which is a really good coaching move, where you say, "Hey, you see that crash you just did? That's because you're all compressed. Don't do that."
School of hard knocks, man. Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah, no, it's exactly that. It's coming into the wake stacked, so that your legs can then be soft and absorb when needed, without getting you super compressed, super low to the water, and super compromised going outbound into the next buoy. So yeah, that's cool. That's good stuff. So getting ready to ski, was warming up for ski ride. It's December 2nd. It's like 64 degrees. People are skiing here at the ridge. And I was thinking about the warm-ups I do before I ski. I was thinking about the visualization I used to do before I skied every single ski ride, tournament or practice. I was thinking about training in the gym. I was thinking about the mental, the mindset, the nutrition piece, and the technical, all the technical knowledge it takes to better yourself as a water skier. And I realized, like, there has been no future with regards to how to approach becoming a better skier until now. That's what we're really providing. We are believing at the Flow Point Method in a future where you have the tools necessary, you have all the resources that you need to chart your own path, to take your own skiing into your own hands and take the components, the 5 pillars, technical, equipment optimization, fitness, nutrition, mindset, and to really bring them all together into one place where you guys can log in whenever you want, computer, iPhone, iPad, doesn't matter, and start to develop an understanding of how the sport really works. Again, information isn't king, it's implementation. Implementation is how you go from good to great. It's how you find your potential, reach your potential. It's how you become the skier that you know you can be. So having the information is 10% of the battle. Figuring out how to implement it, how to use that information, how to synthesize it into your own skiing to really change your on-water performance. At the end of the day, we want to ski better, we want to ski longer, and we want to be more consistent. We want to have better sets, more days out of the year. That's what the Flow Point Method is all about. It's really a shift in the paradigm, if you will, as far as how to approach your water skiing. And we're really stoked to be able to offer this program, and we're hoping that you guys can tune in more, leave a comment. What do you want to hear about? What do you want to know about the Flow Point Method that you don't already know? Who is it for? It's for every skier, by the way. What does it entail? We can get into more detail if you ask the questions. Let us know what you want. Try out the free trial. It's a 3-day free trial if you log on to flowpointmethod.com. And we're really stoked on this program. So give it a go. And I'm going to go take a ski right now.